Together we question.
Together we achieve.
Together we create.
Together we overcome.
And together we inspire. Welcome to the Empower You podcast.
This episode is brought to you by Checkfront, your all-in-one booking management system.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Empower You, a podcast based out of the University of Victoria, focusing on highlighting local talent, industry leaders, and student experiences in the Inspire program. Empower You focuses on spreading an inspirational and innovative mindset through showcasing new technologies, methodologies, and real human stories. I'm your co-host, Parker DeBruyne. I'm a computer science student at the University of Victoria and Inspire team member on the Greater Victoria Coalition to End Homelessness project.
And I'm your co-host, Jenna Melman, a UVic science student, alumni, and laboratory instructor, as well as an ambassador for the Inspire program. The project that I worked on is the Victoria Brain Injury Society project, better known as VBIS.
And joining us from that project is Marcus Rinzsch. He's a third-year mechanical engineering student, apprentice garage member, VBIS teammate, and now programmer. Marcus is ready to change and inspire the world to a future of more accessible technologies.
And joining us today is our second guest, Sydney Macdonald. Sydney is an undergraduate student who just finished her first year of software engineering. She really enjoys programming, and working on the VBIS project has allowed her to use this skill to make a real impact on people's lives.
So let's get started here. Could you guys tell us a little bit about yourselves and how you got signed up to Inspire in the first place?
Sure. I'd like to start by saying thank you for having me on this podcast.
Yeah, of course.
It's
Thanks
really
so much for
cool.
being here.
I joined Inspire just out of fluke. I met Ali at a party, and we really hit it off.
It's funny how that works, right?
Okay, well, how did I get on here?
No, that's going live. it's honest. It's honest.
Shows I'm networking.
Exactly.
I'd like to start by saying thank you for having me on the podcast.
Yeah.
And I joined Inspire just by meeting Ali randomly one day, and we started talking about how I needed a co-op and how he has this wonderful opportunity to help and change the world. He introduced me to a few of the projects that Inspire has to offer, and I chose the VBIS one. Just seemed intriguing to help people with brain injuries.
Intriguing, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a good motivation, definitely.
I think so.
What about you, Sid?
I actually heard about Inspire through one of my classes, a computer science course I was taking. They posted I don't know what to call it.
The pamphlet, brochure, flyer sort of thing?
Yeah, for Inspire.
Okay.
On our Brightspace page. I was like, whoa, that looks cool. Like student projects and working on real things in the community.
Yeah. Cool. I actually didn't know they posted it through Brightspace, so that's pretty interesting, actually. And when you saw it, were you kind of excited to get involved? And how did you end up choosing the project that you're on?
The specific VBIS project, it sounded like a cool challenge. The way they presented it was creating an app for people who find it hard to look at screens and stuff. And it seemed like a cool challenge.
Yeah, something really applicable to real life, right? Something that's directly going to help people. That makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely. And for our listeners, I want to know from Sid and Marcus, what exactly is VBIS? What does VBIS do for the community?
Well, the Victoria Brain Injury Society, also known as VBIS, as we mentioned, is just an organization here in Victoria who provides resources and programs for people who have acquired a brain injury in their past and are looking to gain their life back and trying to take small steps towards being quote-unquote normal again. Yes.
Yeah, that's quite the challenge, I imagine. What's the design process like on that?
Well, we initially went into VBIS to go interview their clients, see what they truly need and what their struggles are, to see how we can overcome them with an app. And do you care to add?
Yeah, it was most of our design decisions came from the interviews. We went down to VBIS a few times and interviewed as many clients as we could. And we basically just asked them what they wanted, what was really hard for them to deal with on phone applications and websites and stuff, and what would make it better, and then try to translate all of that into our design.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard from the Inspire program that an iterative process of development is crucial to every project and team. I mean, that sounds like the bedrock of that is like really engaging with the user and getting feedback actively. Like, how often did you guys like, interview them, design something, and then go back to get feedback and like do that whole process? Like, was that
too often?
Yeah, that's probably a good thing.
Never too often, actually.
I was going to say that. Never enough.
Yeah. No, we would, the first round of interviews, we quickly realized the website that VBIS has to offer is not catered for people with acquired brain injuries.
Right.
So first we would ask them what about the website is potentially a little overwhelming for them, so that we can not include that in the app, and suggest other design features that would simplify their navigation through an application. And then we would design some features such as a grayscale app, for example. It's something so simple they don't really think about, but it is just so wonderful and simple. It's all about being simple.
Yeah.
So we would present that to the clients, and then they'd say, oh no, the buttons are too hard to see. Make them a bit more defined, for example.
Yeah, and something that's really difficult is actually making something more simple. Like writing a good paper, I tell my students all the time. The material is hard, but actually writing a good paper is more difficult than that.
No
right?
kidding.
Simplifying everything is so incredibly difficult.
Yeah, because there's no room for like any embellishments or like anything that's extra. Like
Exactly.
You said grayscale was kind of the main design for the UI. Is that right? Like,
yeah. So we noticed with colors, there's contrast issues. There's even just being red-green colorblind, for example. If the VBIS colors unfortunately feature a lot of green, so adding green to the app and having it kind of disappear with the background if you are red-green colorblind is very unfortunate and goes against our main motive for the app, which is accessibility in a way.
Right.
And is that the whole motivation behind this project? Like, why did VBIS initially want an app for their clients? I'm going to ask Sydney.
Yeah. I think they wanted an app because it would be specifically designed for their clients. Like, as Marcus said before, the website they have right now, it's more for like the general public or friends and family of people with acquired brain injuries who, want to know what VBIS does, what kind of services they offer. But it's not designed for people with acquired brain injuries. So for someone with a brain injury looking at it, there's a lot of information on there. There's a lot of colors and like moving parts. So it's pretty overwhelming. So most of the clients we talk to don't use the website at all. Some of them said they've never opened it once.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a problem.
Yeah.
So our goal was to take all of the important information that clients might need on the website and put it in a place that they can easily understand and like access.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. And did they give any guidelines about like future goals for development and like where do you guys see the project scaling to after all of this?
Well, as of right now, the scaling process I would say is just adding all the features that we've proposed. So scaling it to the actual app that we desire. And then beyond that, it would be it's an interesting scaling process because most apps the way they scale is adding more users, just shoving as many users into it as possible. And that just blows the app up.
Right.
But with this one, it's instead of pushing users in, we're actually pushing organizations in, but in a very strange way, because what we do is we take the app, we propose it to an organization, they say we like the app, they put their users in, but that's a standalone app.
Oh.
We take the app to another organization, they put their users in, another standalone app. So it expands in a way where it's like a million tiny standalone apps for each of their organizations, but they're all based off of the one app.
That's really cool.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
The thing I want to know is, since you're working with such a vulnerable population and sensitive data, is that a better solution to, say, bigger databases and like breaches of security, everything like that? Is this a more secure solution?
The surfaces we're using are quite secure. For example, our database, as an example, is Firebase, which is offered by Google. They provide not only a lot of resources on how to set it up properly and securely, but they also just guarantee a level of security that we personally would not be able to guarantee if we were to build it all on our own. So by working with Firebase, we can limit how they input data into the database, as well as who gets to read it. But beyond that, the additional security features of any background backdoors, all of that is secured by Google's Firebase, which is really nice.
So you've eliminated the complexity by just choosing the best database that you possibly could.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's awesome. And going back to what it's like working with vulnerable populations, what has it been like? Have you had to change your mindset when interviewing them, or have you had to change even your body language? Like, I want to know about the experience that you have endured.
Sure. It's been different. It was really, really interesting to hear, like from the clients themselves, hear their stories and like what they struggle with. It was something I'd never thought about, like how hard it is to have an acquired brain injury and the things that they struggle with, like memory loss, concentration issues. Use so much like processing power with a brain injury. So it was really, really interesting to hear that, and then trying to translate that into the app to make it easy for them. It was really interesting to hear like their stories and their backgrounds. Of the clients we interviewed, there were so many different professional backgrounds. It was really cool to hear that.
And they all want to tell you their story too,
Yeah,
which is always great. But then you don't quite realize that by them telling their story, they're using part of that energy that they have for the day. So then by the time you reach the end of the story and you want to actually interview them for user feedback on a feature that you're proposing, they're kind of done for the day. So you need to kind of control the amount of storytelling and casual conversation that you can have in the interview before you run out of time and have to send them on their way so they don't leave exhausted. Which has been a struggle for us, actually managing that time.
Interesting.
We did have to change sort of our interview process from where it was at the beginning. We did get some feedback from the clients that it wasn't the greatest setup.
Oh, really?
So we had, instead of doing like group interviews where we kind of just threw out questions, we had to change to having like the clients come to us one by one.
Okay. Were they pretty willing to come to you guys on that?
Yes,
silence.
and no. So the yes would be that they all really like this idea of the app. The app is wonderful. They're all excited for it. They all like the progress that they've seen so far. The no would be that the interview process alone, it seems to be as simple as we can make it. It's still somewhat overwhelming for them.
Okay.
So, and in the past, through our learning curve of trying to make a simpler interview, we've kind of shown them that we might not be the best at interviews yet.
Yeah.
So I think some of them are not as willing to risk that overwhelming situation again, which is unfortunate. So we're asking our community partner to organize a group of volunteers, which are clients, to help give us some feedback.
And Jenna, you're a big part of this team, of course, right?
Oh, absolutely.
How often do you check in with them on a daily basis? And how are you close with the development process?
So for me, the biggest challenge for this project is being more hands-off. I'm the type of person that wants to be in there, and I want to be hands-on. They're both laughing at this table. I can see them smiling.
Yeah.
They know me. So yeah, the biggest challenge for me has been being hands-off, letting them take the reins. I have their back 100%. I'm ready for them to, make the mistakes. That's how you learn. And I'm always here to support them. The growth that I've seen is astronomical. Like, that's all I can say. How Sydney and Marcus are sitting here and they're telling us about their interview processes, how they had to actually overcome challenges and readjust their thinking process is just so empowering to me, because I've provided that safe space for them to fail, and they feel comfortable doing it and they learn from it.
That's incredible. It must be like so motivating to see that kind of progress. That's amazing. How would you guys describe your team culture and work dynamics?
Ooh, I think this is a good question for Sydney and Marcus, just because they are working with our other two members, Vivian and Shamim, more closely.
Mm-hmm.
I just monitor our Slack channel a lot. So when there's debugging to be done and all this, the tiers and everything come in because they're like, how do I fix this? I just support them. So
yeah, absolutely.
that aspect of team culture. So I'm going to let you guys have this one. How is the team culture within the team?
Thank you. An example right there.
Yeah.
I would say how I feel about it, I'll speak for myself. I feel very, very comfortable sharing ideas within the team, which I think is very important for designing. And then also we bounce off a lot, off of each other. And ideas start from some small, obscure idea to being a fully developed front end, for example. That it's just all of us sitting in a room, almost locking ourselves in until it's figured out. And then we figure it out. It just happens. And so it's really cool to just be able to work with people who also want to work on the project.
Yeah, I imagine that's got to be like one of the main factors of getting along well, is like everyone's motivated to actually see the project succeed. They believe in what you're doing. And how has that been? Like, do you guys have a strong sense of what you're doing and drive for all of this?
Drive, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sydney, I want to hear from your story. We heard from Marcus on what the team culture was like, and how do you feel about that as well? Can you add to that?
I would agree with what Marcus said. I think the culture's sort of evolved as the project has. At the beginning, we spent most of our time as a team, as Marcus said, in one room, trying to work out all the details, all drawing on the whiteboard. What if we put this there?
Yeah.
And that was mostly what we did. And once we started coding, we split a little bit. Vivian and Shamim are working on the front end of the app, so they spend most of their time just coding that, and then they'll bring it back to us and be like, wow, it looks so good. And then me and Marcus have been working on the back end, so we've been trying to set up the database and link it to the app. We're now working on an interface for the VBIS staff to update the database.
Right, great. So you guys have diversified a little bit in roles and what everyone's working on. Yeah. Could you describe the different roles briefly? I know you mentioned the back end there and everything, but do you guys was that an agreed moment among the team members of who's going to be doing what specifically? How did you guys navigate that?
Earlier in the project, I think we kind of just discussed as a team. Just asked each other what everyone wanted to work on. Marcus really wanted to work on the back end, not the front end.
Yeah.
And then Shamim was like, "Yeah, I can do the front end."
And this is very interesting, Parker, because when they were telling me that they had split into two groups, one was doing the front end, one was doing the back end, I looked at them and I said, "Are you all happy with this?" And the front end team said, "I don't want to do the back end." And the back end team said, "I don't want to do the front end." And they were looking at me like I was crazy. And I was like, this is great. That means you're happy. You're all in your place. And my job is done for the day. So they definitely make sure that their voices are heard. If there's any communication issues, they do speak up. And that's very, very important to me. And it's something I've stressed the entire time. Absolutely. They're nodding. They're like, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So let's talk about some personal challenges here for a moment. What's been some of the stumbling blocks and largest hurdles for you guys?
I think as a group for the back end, the database, just everything to do with the database. That is a hurdle still.
Yeah. And
we're slowly overcoming the hurdles that define the bigger hurdle, such as even just finding a database. We found one.
Congratulations.
And then setting it all up, getting it linked to the database. Linking the database to the app. That was a struggle that Sydney covered very well. She solved that. Would you like to explain that?
I would love to hear about this.
Yeah. Once we realized partway through the project that we needed a database. Then we started doing some research into what the best database would be, like to integrate with our app, and we're using React Native. So I did a lot of research into what databases worked best with React Native, and kind of the features of each database and which one would work best for the information we want to put on the app. And then me and Marcus each kind of took a database that we thought might work and tried to fiddle around with it, see if we could set it up and if it would work well. And we did that. I was working on Firebase, so I set up a kind of example database and linked it to the app, and it worked pretty well. Marcus was working on Realm.
Yeah, so I set up also like just a mock. I pretended as though we were going to use it, and I just set everything up that we would in theory need. Perfect. And then we would compare those two setups. And originally we were looking for a database that not only was cheap and affordable for VBIS, which is a nonprofit organization, so they don't have a lot of funding. So what we were thinking is, with our time constraints, to update the database, it needs to be simple. Just in general, it always needs to be simple to update this information. So we either develop a whole staff UI, which is what we're doing now, but at the time we thought we were kind of limited on our time. So we would instead just skip that hurdle completely by finding a database that is easy to navigate through and add information directly onto the interface of the database. So that was another reason why we chose Firebase. It was just more intuitive, simpler, easier to link, cheaper as well. So just all the great reasons to choose Firebase for our database.
That's great. So you guys did a lot of research and compared different options, and found something that's finally worked for you. That's awesome.
Lots of trial and error.
So
Yes.
much.
A lot. I want to ask Sydney, you mentioned using React Native, and I know this is something that the other groups have also been using, and they had to actually overcome the challenge of not being familiar with React Native. Do you want to explain to our listeners what React Native is, and were you familiar with this before, or did you actually have to learn those technical skills as well?
Sure. So we're making a mobile app, which put on your phone, and one of the biggest challenges with creating mobile apps specifically is different code works on different phones. So if you just wanted to code an app, you would have to use a different language and different code and functions if you wanted to put it on an Apple phone versus, say, an Android phone. So React Native is sort of like a library framework kind of thing in JavaScript. It basically has a lot of built-in functions and code in JavaScript that works on both Apple and Android phones. So you can reuse your code for wherever you want to deploy your app. I was not familiar with it, so I did have to learn both JavaScript and React Native.
Oh, wow.
So spent a lot of time doing coding tutorials at the beginning of the project.
No kidding. That sounds like quite the challenge.
And Marcus, did you have to also learn those?
Yeah, I also had to learn React Native and JavaScript. The nice thing about React Native, though, is that it's very similar to other existing languages, such as HTML. It's similar, but still varies, obviously. But you still build, a bit of code jargon, you're still building containers to put images into, for example. So it's not too far off, and I've had a bit of experience with HTML, so it was just a little sidestep.
Right.
Yeah, it wasn't too bad.
Well translated then.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. And last question, how would you guys say your perspectives have changed since engaging with your user base from the beginning of the project compared to now?
Well, Sydney, how about you cover that one?
Sorry, our perspective on the users?
Well, specifically inclusivity, diversity, that sort of thing. Did you learn a lot about these individuals that maybe you weren't expecting to along your road to where you are now?
Yeah. At the beginning of the project, we had a training session at VBIS where they told us basically about brains and about brain injuries, which was super interesting. So much about brains and how they work, and also about brain injuries and how they're so individual, and depending on how the injury happens, it changes the effects of the injury completely. Where the injury happens in your brain, what type of injury it is, which I did not know. I didn't know anything about brain injuries before this, so I learned a lot, which was really interesting. And it was something I've never Something I'd never thought about before. Like how much a brain injury like changes your life.
That's super fascinating. I didn't realize it could be like so individually specific. Can you give any examples of like challenges that people might have that are just like very specific to one individual and maybe not so many others?
Well, depending where you're hit on the head, as Sydney mentioned, sometimes dexterity becomes a really big issue.
Okay.
So we also have to account for that on the app design. But so dexterity can become an issue. Just general visual impairments, such as one lady actually, she was telling us when she scrolls on anything, she just closes her eyes. It's the only way she can deal with scrolling, because this visual motion of something moving in front of her when the phone isn't moving itself is very nauseating. So she just closes her eyes, scrolls, and then opens them again. So that's one way, a very specific case where a client has overcome this visual impairment in her own special way.
And that would directly impact your UI design.
Exactly.
That's gotta be such a like diverse challenge or just multifaceted challenge.
Yeah. So we're trying to like avoid. It's created some constraints, color constraints. Scrolling has tried to eliminate it as best as possible without creating so many pages in the app where they just get lost in the app instead. So it's been a hard compromise.
And you talk about these constraints, right? And I can hear that you sound defeated, but the way that you talk about interacting with the clients and the way you talk about their injuries, you get so enthusiastic about it. And I can hear the excitement coming from, an area of deep passion. So I think that's what's going to get you through it. And I know you guys are going to have something absolutely incredible at the end.
Oh, we will.
Well, we're excited to see how it all turns out and what you guys end up releasing. Thank you so much for tuning into our 4th Inspire episode. I'm your co-host, Parker DeBrune.
And I'm your co-host, Jenna Melman.
Join us next week for an episode on Indigenous and family representation in STEM.
Remember to stay inspired and empowered, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
Thanks so much for coming out today, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm Parker DeBrune.
I'm your co-host, Jenna Melman.
Thanks so much for tuning in today. Until next time, stay inspired.